welcome to AWS Tutorials. My name is Kastro Kiran. From this week onwards, we are going to start a new service that is available in AWS, which is known as EC2, which is also called as Elastic Compute Cloud. So we are going to see multiple concepts that are available in the EC2 service, starting from how to launch the EC2 instance, how to connect to the EC2 instance, how to work with load balancers, how to work with auto scaling groups, how to work with launch templates. Like this, we are going to delve into the deeper details of understanding the EC2 service, especially with respect to the real-time scenarios. Now, as a part of this video, we are going to talk about three important concepts here. The first one is, let us understand what is meant by virtualization, what are the different types of virtualizations that we have, and finally, we are going to look after a concept which is known as shared host versus the dedicated host. Now, the first thing we are going to talk is about virtualization. Now, the thing is, why we need to talk about virtualization before understanding the EC2 service? That is the question that we are going to address in this particular concept. Now, in order to understand the virtualization concept, let us look into a scenario here. The scenario is, let's say an user is there, and this particular user is using a Linux-based operating system, and this particular user has developed a Netflix application in the Linux-based operating system. Now, the user wants to check the compatibility of this particular application, which is developed in Linux-based operating system, in the other types of operating system, such as Mac operating system and also Windows-based operating system. Now here, since the original application was developed by using Linux-based operating system, the user wants to check the compatibility whether this particular application is working in other types of operating system or not. This is the scenario here. Now, here, whenever you want to check the compatibility of the application in different types of operating system, what we need is, we need to buy the extra resources. Let's say I need to buy the Mac operating system software. I need to buy Windows operating system software. Why we need to buy these? Because we want to check the compatibility of the application. Now, in real-time scenarios, buying the additional resources in order to check the compatibility of any particular application is an expensive process. So to avoid this expensiveness, what we use is, we are going to use a concept which is known as virtualization. Now let's talk about what is meant by virtualization here. Virtualization is something which is basically a technology that allows multiple operating systems, applications, or the hardware resources to run independently and also simultaneously on a single physical machine. So let us look into this definition one by one step. So first thing is, what is meant by virtualization? It is a technology that allows multiple operating systems to run independently on a single physical machine. Let's say I have a Windows-based operating system, which we usually have in our laptop. Now, what I want, I have developed an application in the Windows-based operating system. Now, my intention is to check the compatibility of the application, which is developed on Windows-based operating system. Now, in order to check the compatibility, what I need to have the other types of operating systems, such as the Linux operating system and Mac operating system. Now here, what is meant by physical machine? A physical machine is something which is a Windows-based operating system. So here I have developed the application in the Windows-based operating system, and I want to check the compatibility of the same application on the other two types of operating systems, that is Linux and Mac operating system. Now, what is my intention here? My intention is to check the compatibility of the application which is developed by using Windows-based operating system. Now, since I cannot buy the additional resources such as Linux operating system and Mac operating system and any other types of operating system, what we use is, I am going to use a concept called virtualization. Now, what exactly is virtualization? On a single machine. So this is actually the single machine. Windows operating system is a single machine. On the single machine, what I am doing, I am running the Linux-based operating system and Mac-based operating system. That is what virtualization definition tells. Virtualization is a technology that allows multiple operating systems. Am I getting multiple operating systems here? Yes. Where I'm getting these two multiple operating systems? On a single physical machine. What is my physical machine? The Windows-based operating system. So on a single physical machine, I am going to use or I am going to install two types of operating system in order to check the compatibility of the application. Now, if you ask me, is it that simple to host multiple operating systems on a single physical machine? It's not that easy. So in order to do this kind of setup, we need a software which is known as hypervisor. Okay, we need a software which is known as hypervisor. Now, what is the use of this hypervisor? The use of this hypervisor software is in order to use multiple operating systems on a single physical machine, we need this software which is known as hypervisor software. Okay, we need this software which is known as hypervisor software. This entire concept is known as virtualization. So what is meant by virtualization? On a single machine, I need multiple operating systems to run. Now, in order to host multiple operating systems on a single physical machine, I need a software which is known as a hypervisor. Okay, I need a software which is known as hypervisor. This entire concept is known as virtualization concept. Let us understand virtualization concept in a little better way and also in a deep way. But before that, let us see what are the different types of virtualizations that we have. In general, we have two types of virtualization. The first one is known as a type 1 and the second one is known as a type 2. Type 1 is also called as native or bare metal virtualization. And type 2 is known as hosted virtualization. Now let's understand what is meant by type 1 virtualization. In type 1 virtualization, what actually happens is on top of existing hardware. Okay, let's say you have your own laptop and in your laptop you have the hardware. So what I am doing in type 1, on top of existing hardware, directly we will install the hypervisor software. On top of existing hardware, what I am going to do is I am directly going to install the hypervisor software. Now, what is the advantage of installing the hypervisor software? The advantage is I can install or I can host multiple operating systems on a single physical machine by using this hypervisor software. Let's take this as a scenario. The scenario is, let's say I have the hardware components. Let's say I have some 64 GB RAM, 1 TB hard disk, like processor. All these hardware components are available with me. Now, what I am going to do in type 1, I am going to install a software which is known as hypervisor. Now, what is the advantage of using a hypervisor software? I can host multiple operating systems on the same hardware component. That is called as type 1, which is also called as native or bare metal virtualization. Now let's talk about what is meant by hosted virtualization or type 2 virtualization. Basically, in type 2 virtualization, what happens is on top of existing hardware, instead of installing the hypervisor software directly, what we do is we will install the operating system. It can be any type of operating system. On top of operating system, we are going to install the hypervisor software. On top of hypervisor software, we are going to configure the different types of operating systems according to our requirement. That's called as type 2. So what actually happens in the type 2? I have the existing hardware components. Let's say I have 64 GB RAM, 1 TB hard disk, some processor, some kind of CPU. All these are called as the hardware components. Now, in type 2, what I am doing on top of hardware components, I am not going to install the hypervisor directly. Instead, what I'll do, I will install an operating system. Let's say that I'm going to install a Linux-based operating system on top of my physical machine. Okay, on top of my physical machine, I am going to install the operating system. And here, the operating system that I am installing is the Linux-based operating system. Now, on top of Linux-based operating system, I am going to install the hypervisor software. On top of hypervisor software, I am going to install or I am going to host multiple types of operating system according to my requirement. This is called as type 2 hypervisor. The simple difference between type 1 and type 2 virtualization is in type 1, on top of existing hardware components, I will directly install the hypervisor software. And then according to my requirement, I am going to configure the different operating systems on top of hypervisor. That's called as a type 1. In type 2, what I'll do is I will have the existing hardware components. In that, I am going to install the operating system. On top of operating system, I am going to install the hypervisor software. On top of hypervisor software, I am going to install the operating systems that I need. That's called as type 2. So this is the simple difference between type 1 and type 2 virtualization. Let me show you another example of type 1 and type 2 virtualization. So in type 1 virtualization, what is happening? I have the hardware components. You can see these are called as host hardware platform. Here I'll have all types of hardware components that are required for me. Now, on top of hardware components, what I'm doing, I'm going to install a hypervisor software. Okay, I'm going to install hypervisor software. On top of hypervisor software, what I am doing, I am going to install multiple operating systems. Okay, I'm going to install multiple operating systems. So here, technically, with respect to the EC2 concept, what I will do is on top of hypervisor software, I am going to launch the EC2 instances, which are also called as virtual machines. On top of hypervisor software, what I am going to do is I am going to launch multiple EC2 instances, which are also called as virtual machines. You can see this is my first virtual machine, this is my second virtual machine, and this is my third virtual machine. Now, on top of each virtual machine, what I'm going to do, I'm going to install the operating system. It can be Linux-based operating system. It can be Windows-based operating system. It can be a Mac-based operating system. It can be a Red Hat-based operating system. Doesn't matter. So I am going to install multiple operating systems on multiple machines. Now, on top of operating systems, what I will do is I will deploy the different applications according to my requirement. This is called as type 1 virtualization. Now, in type 2 virtualization, what actually happens is on top of existing hardware component, I am going to install an operating system. Okay, I'm going to install an operating system. This operating system is called as host operating system. Now, on top of host operating system, I'm going to install the hypervisor software. And then on top of hypervisor software, I will create multiple EC2 instances. And these instances can have the same operating system, or they can also have different operating systems. So the operating systems that we are going to install in the virtual machines are known as guest operating system. So what is the host operating system? On top of hardware component, I am installing an operating system. So that's called as host operating system. And then I'm going to install the hypervisor software. This hypervisor software allows me to launch multiple instances which are having different operating systems. On top of operating systems, I am going to launch or I am going to deploy the applications according to my requirement. This is the simple difference between type 1 and type 2 virtualization. Let me give you another example of type 2 virtualization. Let's say you are going to a shop in order to buy a laptop. Now, when you are going to buy a laptop, you are going to check whether it is having all the hardware components or not. Let's say your requirement is 1 TB hard disk, 64 GB RAM, 4 GB graphics card. Like this, you have the requirement of hardware component. Now, you have the hardware component in your laptop. Now, just because you have the hardware component in your laptop, will you be able to turn on your laptop? No. So what we have to do, we need to install an operating system. Let's say in my laptop, I have Windows-based operating system. So now what I'll do, since I have the operating system, I can create any kind of works. Let's say I'll create documents. Let's say I'll open browser and access the websites. I can do anything once I have the operating system. Now, let's say this operating system is Windows operating system. In all our laptops, we have Windows operating system or Mac operating systems if it is an Apple notepads or Apple books. Now, let's say I have an operating system. Now, I want to have in the same laptop, I want to install a Linux-based operating system. And I also want to install an Ubuntu-based operating system. And I also want to install the Mac operating system. Yes, it's possible technically. But how? We need to have the hypervisor software. Once you install the hypervisor software on the host operating system, what is our host operating system here? Here in our laptops, our host operating system is Windows operating system. On top of host operating system, I'm going to install the type 2 hypervisor. Now, this type 2 hypervisor allows me to create multiple operating systems. On top of each operating system, I can launch multiple applications or I can deploy multiple applications. So this is called as type 2 virtualization or type 2 hypervisor. Now I hope you got an idea about what is meant by type 1 and type 2 virtualization. Now let's look at the virtualization layers here. You can see here there are multiple layers that are available. The very first layer where we have all the hardware components like the core, RAM, all these things, they are called as, or this particular layer is called as physical hardware layer. Okay, this particular layer where the hardware components are available, it is called as physical hardware layer. On top of physical hardware layer, what I'll do, I will install a hypervisor. Okay, it can be a type 1 or it can be a type 2. So on top of hypervisor, what I'm going to install, I am going to install the multiple EC2 instances, or I'm going to launch multiple EC2 instances. The component which consists of hypervisor and the EC2 instances is known as virtualization layer. Okay, is known as a virtualization layer. On top of EC2 instances, what I'll do, I will host or I will deploy multiple operating systems. It can be Windows, it can be Linux, it can be Ubuntu, anything it can be. This is called as an infrastructure layer. So what I am doing here, I am going to install a Windows-based operating system. Windows-based operating system is an infrastructure. Linux-based operating system is an infrastructure. Like this, I am going to create the infrastructure here, where I'm creating on top of virtualization layer. Okay, on top of virtualization layer, I'm going to create the infrastructure layer. Now, on top of infrastructure layer, what I will do, I will deploy the applications according to my requirement. And the layer where you are going to deploy the applications is known as application software layer. So usually in virtualization, we have 4 layers. The first layer is known as physical layer or physical hardware layer, where the hardware components are available. The second layer is known as virtualization, where the hypervisors and the virtual machines, which are also called as EC2 instances, will be available here. And the third layer is known as infrastructure layer, where we are going to install multiple operating systems in the virtual machines, which are also called as EC2 instances. Once we install the operating systems in the infrastructure layer, I am going to deploy or I am going to host multiple applications on the top of infrastructure layer. So these are the different layers that are available in the virtualization concept. Let's look at the virtualization concept in a much deeper way. Let's say I have the physical servers. If you go to any organization, in any organization, you will see the physical servers. Nowadays, everybody is moving towards the cloud domain or cloud infrastructure creation. But let's assume that 10 years before or 20 years before, every software organization used to have their own server rooms. They are called as physical servers. What does it mean by physical servers? Let's say a room will be available. Inside the room, we are going to have the servers, and these servers will be maintained by the maintenance team. If there are any repairs or if there are any costs that incurs, everything will be taken care by the organization itself. This is what happens in the physical servers. Now, let's say you are going to use an EC2 service. Now, by using EC2 service, what we can do is we can create the servers in the cloud. Okay, we can create the servers in the cloud. And these servers are called as EC2 instances. Okay, the servers which you are going to create in the cloud domain are known as instances. If you create the servers in the cloud domain, especially the AWS cloud domain, those servers are called as EC2 instances. Okay, EC2 is the name of the service, and the server which you create on the virtual cloud is known as instance. So therefore, EC2 instances. Now, let's say you are using EC2 service and you are going to launch one EC2 instance. Now, when you launch an EC2 instance, do you think that AWS will buy the entire server setup and they are going to give you this entire one? No. So technically, AWS will not buy a server and it will not keep in the rack for us. So what it does, instead, what it will do is it is going to have a physical server. Okay, it is going to have a physical server. A bare metal physical server will be available with a high configuration possible. Let's say I have my physical server. This physical server is also known as host machine. Now, this host machine will have some default configuration. okay, which will be taken care by AWS again. Let's say I have a RAM of 128 GB, hard disk of 2 TB. Like this, the physical server will be having certain configuration. Now, on top of physical server, okay, on top of physical server, whenever you create an EC2 instance or whenever you launch an EC2 instance, what happens is we are going to launch the EC2 instances on top of this host machine only. Okay, on top of this host machine only. Let's say you are going to launch one EC2 instance, which is called as a VM1, virtual machine 1. Now, what is the configuration of host machine 128 GB? What is the hard disk 2 TB? Like that, you have different configuration. Now, let's say you are launching one EC2 instance, a virtual machine. Now, this virtual machine will be having a different set of configuration. Let's say the operating system is Mac operating system. Out of 128 GB of a host machine, let's say here you have used some 10 GB, and out of 2 DB, here you have used, let's say, some 500 GB of SSD. Like this, you are going to create the EC2 instances on top of host machine. You can also create multiple EC2 instances with different configurations on top of host machine. That is how the virtual machines or EC2 instances will get created when you launch an EC2 instance by using AWS Cloud. So how it gets created? There will be a host machine with highest possible configuration, as you can see here. On top of the host machine, you can launch multiple instances according to our requirement. Don't worry about how to launch an EC2 instance, how to select the configuration. All these things I'll be explaining you in the upcoming videos. Here I am just focusing on the concept of virtualization. So you have the host machine. On top of host machine, you can create multiple EC2 instances according to your required configuration. Now, in order to create the virtual machines on top of host machine, we know that we need a software which is known as hypervisor software. Okay, we need a software which is known as hypervisor software. But if you ask me, are we going to install the hypervisor software on the host machine? No, AWS will take care of hypervisor software. It will install the hypervisor software and it will just allow us to configure the EC2 instances according to our requirement. So technically, in EC2 service, we don't have to bother about this physical server, and we also don't have to bother about the hypervisor software. These two things will be taken care by the AWS cloud itself. Now, what you have to take care as an user, you have to take care of launching the EC2 instances according to your configuration or according to your requirement. This entire concept is known as virtualization. Okay, this entire concept is known as virtualization. Now, on top of virtual machines, what we will do, we will host the applications. It can be a Java-based applications, it can be a Python-based application, it can be a .NET-based application, it can be a simple HTML page. All these examples we are going to see one by one as we progress towards the tutorials of AWS, especially the EC2 service. So this concept is known as virtualization now. Right. Now let's see what are the different types of hypervisors that we have. In general, we have two types of hypervisors. The first one is known as Zen hypervisor, which is the oldest one. Currently, it is not available in the AWS cloud. And the second type of hypervisor is known as the Nitro hypervisor, which is the latest one. And currently, AWS is supporting only the Nitro-based hypervisors, not the Zen-based hypervisors. Why it supports only Nitro-based hypervisors? Because these are the advanced ones and they work at a faster pace. So that's the reason why AWS is supporting only the Nitro-based hypervisors. If you want to know more details about what is a Zen hypervisor, what is a Nitro hypervisor, I will be giving you the link in the description of this video. You can check that link also. But currently, we don't need to bother much about the details of what is a Zen and what is a Nitro hypervisor. But the only thing that you have to remember here is AWS is currently supporting only the Nitro-based hypervisors because of its fastness and also because of its advanced features. These are the two types of hypervisors that we have. And coming to the types of virtualization, as I was telling, we have two types of virtualization. The first one is type 1 and the second one is type 2 virtualization. But apart from that, we also have another two types of virtualization on a large scale. The first one is known as HVM, which is also known as hardware virtualization model. And the second one is known as PVM, which is also called as para virtualization model. So these are the two types of virtualization models that we have: hardware virtualization model and para virtualization model. Now, if you ask me which one we are going to use in the real-time scenarios, actually, AWS is supporting only HVM based virtualization, that is hardware virtualization model, because it is providing high level of security when we compare with the para virtualization model. So AWS, again, it is not supporting para virtualization model because it has less security feature. When AWS was initially launched, that time we had this option of para virtualization model. But over a period of time, they have developed a high secured based virtualization model, which is known as hardware virtualization model. So these are the two types of hypervisors and two types of virtualization models that we have in general scenario. Right. Now let's talk about a concept called a shared host and a dedicated host. I was telling previously that we are going to have a physical server. Okay, we are going to have a physical server, which is also called as a host machine. Let's assume that I have my physical server or a host machine with required configuration. Let's say 2 TB hard disk, high-end processor, and also 10 CPUs, high-end graphic card, high-end RAM. All these configurations are available in my physical server. Now, on top of physical server, let's say an user one is there. User one wants to launch an EC2 instance. Okay, this is the logo for EC2 instance. The square box that you are seeing, that's actually the logo of EC2 instance. There are multiple versions also, but we don't need to bother. Just assume that this is the logo of EC2 instance. Now, what is happening? You have the physical server. On top of physical server, what you are doing, you are going to launch one EC2 instance. Now, here the question is, who is going to maintain this physical server? AWS is going to maintain the physical server. Do we need to bother about hypervisor software? No, AWS will take care of the hypervisor software. So what you have to do as an AWS user, you have to launch one EC2 instance according to your requirement. Now, let's say the second user is also there and he is also launching an instance. The third user is also there and he is also launching an EC2 instance. Now, if you see here, where are all these three instances are getting launched? All these three instances are getting launched on a single physical server or a single host machine. That's called as shared host. Let's say you are in an apartment. Now, in an apartment, do you have or do you own a complete apartment? Technically, no. What you will do, you are going to buy a flat in the apartment. So here, if you assume the host machine or physical server is the complete apartment. Now, in the apartment, multiple houses will be there. So similarly, here also, in the host machine, you can create multiple EC2 instances. This type of thing is known as shared host. Okay, this type of thing is known as shared host. See, the apartment is same, but individually you are having your own flats. That's called as a shared host. Now let's talk about another one, which is known as a dedicated host. Now in dedicated host, the entire setup will be same. There is no change in the dedicated host setup. You will have a physical server. On top of physical server, each user can launch multiple instances according to their requirement with the required configuration. Now, if you ask me, what would be the difference between the shared host and dedicated host is, let's say you are working in an organization, or let's say we have a company called IBM. Now, what IBM will do is, IBM don't want to have or don't want to use the shared host. Why? Let's say all these three people, assume that you have the shared host here. All these three people are working for different organizations. By any chance, there is a chance that one person might hack another EC2 instance and they can see the data that is available in the server, which usually does not happen. But let's go to the worst case scenario that a person is able to hack other EC2 instance which belongs to another company called Exa. Now, what will happen here? The data security is not available here. But again, remember, AWS is going to provide high level of security to all the servers or to all the services that are available in the AWS cloud. But just for as an example, let's assume that one person who is launching an EC2 instance on the same physical machine is going to hack the EC2 instance that is available on the same physical server. There is a probability of that. Now, let's say that IBM company don't want to use the shared host. Instead, what this IBM company will do is it is going to buy the entire physical server. Okay, it is going to buy the entire physical server. Now, what it will tell to IBM employees is we have bought one host server or we have bought one physical server or a host machine. Whenever you want to launch an EC2 instances, you are going to launch the EC2 instances on the physical server which belongs to IBM organization. Okay, so here what is happening? A closed loop is forming here. Now, who can launch the servers or who can launch the EC2 instances on the physical server? Only IBM employees will be able to launch. So IBM employees will be given the access to this host server, and then they are going to launch the EC2 instances on the same physical server. Now, is there any chance that outsiders can come and hack the EC2 instances? It's not possible. So that is the difference between shared host and dedicated host. Shared host is something like, let's say you are having a physical server. On top of physical server, there will be multiple EC2 instances where security is a concerning factor. But on the dedicated host, a specific organization is going to buy the entire physical server. On top of physical server, they are going to allow its users or its employees to launch the EC2 instances only on the physical server which the company has bought. So this is how you can provide additional layer of security to the EC2 instances against any of the security breaches or the data loss factors. This is the difference between a shared host and dedicated host. So in this video, we have understood what is meant by virtualization, what are the different types of virtualizations that we have, what is meant by a hypervisor, how hypervisor is going to help us in order to launch multiple EC2 instances on the same physical machine. And we have also understood what is meant by a shared host and dedicated host. And finally, we have also seen the differences between a shared host and dedicated host. That is all from my end in this video. We are going to talk another concept of EC2 service in the next video. Thank you.